Everybody's very welcome, including and especially members of the public who are here and the media, the press. Apologies. We've had some apologies. Apologies from ACC Forber, ACC Pulteney, Nigel Hiller, Kevin Wright, Eric Redfern and Councillor Peter Wood. And the Chief, obviously.
The Chief's chairing the National Problem Solving Conference.
National Problem Solving Conference. So national problems will be
It's a national conference, not solving national problems,
okay.
which might take slightly longer.
Probably. Thank you. Any other apologies? Okay, I've mentioned filming, and on to item 3, which is announcements. I think it might be as well, David, if you could say just a word to us about coronavirus, where we are at the moment, that everything is in hand as far as...
Yeah, absolutely. We've got the plans already in place at the moment are very much in line with the first phase of Contain. So in terms of PPE, the personal protective equipment for all frontline staff is now out and in place. We've got further reserves of those which give me a level of confidence that we can move through even a peak akin to Italy, that we've got local reserves now secured in terms of PPE that would maintain our core service delivery.
PPE is the equipment?
That's right. So that there is the hand sanitizer for officers, that's going to be across all areas, sort of entrances, gymnasiums, conference rooms. There will be sanitisers where it's necessary to come together. As we head towards the delay, which is the second phase, then that social distancing will be replicated within the organisation, where thankfully we're at a point of having really capable technology which will allow us to protect those core service delivery areas and pretty much work remotely. So we're right at the cusp and awaiting move to that second phase, which is delay, which will then involve lots of population distancing, so the issues around schools, meetings, gatherings, work, sporting events will all come to the fore, and we will have a role around the management of those. So there's the internal and external challenge of that. I've had gold meetings weekly for the last 2 weeks. There's one this afternoon, full afternoon review at Niagara. Tomorrow is our business continuity, a morning exercise working through 10% abstraction of the workforce, then 30%, and then the reasonable worst case scenario of 50% abstraction, and how we would reorganise in terms of protecting core and critical service delivery. The third phase, which is described from the government in terms of research, isn't really a third phase. That's in place throughout this challenge. So really it's a three-stepped approach. Contain, that we're in now, delay, which I think we're going to be in very shortly, and then final, which would be mitigate if we saw it at the scale peaking, similar to Italy, around how we'd manage impact and priorities. So to give that reassurance, yeah, the governance structures there, our business continuity plans, we're in a very healthy place in advance of this. We just refreshed pandemic flu, which was fortunate, and we're working through the detail now, but I have confidence that we can move through those different phases very effectively.
I suppose the difficulty is, you know, if you lose workforce, it depends who and where, so that's makes it all trickier.
Yeah, and this is where the advanced work around what are those core and critical service delivery areas, so we're aware of those, and very much we would have to, if we were facing 30 or 50% reduction of our capacity, we then would see, you know, some broader roles coming into Article 2 issues of right to life around immediate response for violence, for harm. So we might see detectives putting uniform back on. It very much would be saying, what resources have we got available with what skill set, and then we police to those priorities. Thankfully the projections are a peak in worst case scenario would be 3 to 4 weeks, and then it would abate after that. So we've got plans in place. Hopefully we won't get to that, but if we do, we are well prepared.
Thank you very much. Let's hope we're not in Italy. That really is a bad place to be. Thank you. We were going to say goodbye to a couple of people, our two respective finance officers, who are, I think this is the last meeting, Michael, that you'll be at, from the officer's point of view, and I think probably Nigel too. But Nigel isn't here, so all the things I might have said about him will have to wait for another day, I think. But Michael, just to say farewell to you, as far as this board is concerned, and wish you well where you're going to. You came to us from a local authority background. We're really grateful for what you did for the finances, particularly the quality, if I may say so, the reports you wrote for us. That was really appreciated, and the way in which you built a good relationship with the finance people in the force. And now you're on to higher, better and more wonderful things as the Chief Finance Officer for North Yorkshire Police. So we really do wish you well in that. We'll miss you. Public questions. I'm not sure that there are any. No public questions. Urgent items, I think really we've dealt with that with the coronavirus. Items to be considered in the absence of the public. I don't think there are any of those. On to item 7, the declarations of interest. Are there any that we don't know about? Item 8, minutes of the meeting of the public account. Well, there are 2 sets of minutes, those of the 7th of February and then the 25th of February. So first of all, the 7th of February, pages 1 to 12. Any questions as to their accuracy there? All happy with those? And then 13 to 18, the 25th of February. Again, is everybody happy with the accuracy of those minutes? So shall we then consider matters arising, which is item 10, pages 19 and 20. Michelle.
Yes, Commissioner. So the first one, 379, relates to a discussion while we were at Barnsley in relation to what we consider to be the unfair position that police forces are charged a court fee, as all other applicants charge court fees for issuing civil applications in support of operational policing, things like domestic violence protection orders, sexual prevention orders, etc. So we've raised that on the basis of information we've received from the force with the Deputy Chief Constable's help, with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, who are liaising with the National Police Chiefs Council to raise that at ministerial level to see whether or not there could be an exemption introduced for police orders or police applications for civil orders. So that's ongoing. Can I suggest, Commissioner, that's discharged because Mark and I are picking it up at Management Board and we're tracking progress with that. The next 2, 381 and 383, are discharged, and then there are 3 at the bottom that have all been added to the work programme for meetings later in the year in relation to stop and search victims of crime and stalking protection orders.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner, just on the stop and search, I managed to get through those latest figures for January, if you'd like me to just finalise that. For Doncaster for January, the figures that we've got there is 713 incidents of stop and search. There is a nice spread right across service delivery there, with neighbourhoods, central, east and west, offering up 130 of those. Stop and searches fairly distributed across those community teams. Response teams are all well represented in terms of their proactivity, in terms of protecting our communities. The 2 tasking teams at Doncaster have got over 110 stop and searches within January, and very pleasingly, as our tutor unit grows, 74 instances. So good delivery right across Doncaster. In terms of outcomes, slightly below the line of 20% that we've seen force-wide for January. It's 114 positive outcomes, which is 16%.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure Andrew will be taking note of this for the independent Catholics.
Thanks to Dave for updating on that.
Thank you. And as far as the first of that's 379 on the actions, I think if we can be just kept in touch with that, because it is an important issue and it's one that concerns all PCCs and the
In effect, we're penalised for proactivity.
Absolutely.
I think more than most forces we've embraced domestic violence protection notices. We see them as a really valuable tool of protecting people. But the more we do, obviously, the more we incur a charge at court, which seems a bit counterintuitive.
Yeah, well, it's a perverse thing, isn't it? So you don't want that. Okay. So on our agenda then to force performance, and the first report there is item 11, force performance against the police and crime plan, and the area that we're looking at is the priority of treating people fairly. David, this is you again, pages 21 to 30. As I always assume people have read it, and if you pick out some of the highlights of that, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Treating people fairly is absolutely the cornerstone, really, of all of our service delivery, and the report talks to that in terms of a number of key areas of service delivery. One, how do we organise our resourcing, representation within our service delivery, very much the internal and external fairness, and how that experience for both public and our internal staff are treated. So if I take the first part, which is page 21, which is the allocation of our resources, we've got a finite and thankfully at the moment growing baseline of resources, and we need to be seen to be fairly allocating those resources across what is a very complex set of demands, which covers everything from the functions we have to deliver in terms of response, neighbourhoods, investigation, specialist capability, firearms, RPG, public order, and then of course we've got the geography that we need to allocate resources across, and that's everything from our remote rural communities through to inner city. If I compare and contrast to where we were to where we are now, that really spells the difference of how we fairly allocate resources. All we used to be able to do was count the incidents coming in to Atlas Corps, no weighting attached to them, distribute those proportionately around the geographic districts, and then allocate resources proportionately to those in terms of the resource allocation model. We've changed and added degrees of sophistication now, which takes us to a new level, and I don't think it is paralleled with any other force in terms of what we bring behind the resource allocation. So we do what we used to do. We look at incidents. We also look at the details of crime. We apply the Cambridge Harm Index in terms of complexity and vulnerability to bring a sense of grading and weighting to those incidents. And then we look beyond that in terms of officer effort. For each of these different types of demand and call for service, then what is the officer effort in terms of the number of hours and capacity that we would need to invest to actually satisfy offering a good, if not outstanding, level of service. We then take another element, which is we look at the vacancy factor across districts in Establishment Deployment Board, and we put all that together to say, how do we distribute our uniform services, our detective support, our specialist support, and then indeed the allocation of police staff. And that flows from Establishment Deployment Board, Strategic Resourcing Board, and is then approved by the Chief and the DEP at SCT. So really a step change in terms of how we fairly allocate our resources, that the days of people crying foul that this isn't done fairly and proportionately, now we have an evidence base to go to, whether it's our community saying, why do I not see, or it's districts saying, why are resources going? And we do that in the short term through to long term. So in recent, Doncaster was poorly served in terms of the impact to them through people being successful in promotion boards and other levers. The short-term fix is transferees that via EDB are redirected. Doncaster now is balanced, and the short-term challenge is actually Rotherham, and we're fixing that via EDB. The longer term, of course, is our new recruits and those arriving via the main pipeline that are being distributed following this model. So in short, we have a short-term through to long-term plan based upon some real science and sophistication in terms of how we satisfy allocating resources fairly.
I think it is worth underlining, I'm not sure many forces, if any, have got a more detailed understanding of that level of demand, and the point Dave makes about not just counting incidents but actually understanding that incidents vary in the nature and the effort required. So I do think we are in a very positive place, and that then plays through into broader strategic thinking. So as we identified a shortage of detectives, which is nationally acknowledged, then we developed that into the investigating officers programme, the work we've done with the universities to bring through civilian investigators to try and stay fleet of foot and manage gaps as we identify them occurring. That then brings other challenges, but I think hopefully you can be reassured that we do this in an extensive level of detail, and that we apportion things fairly. I think it's important for districts and district councils to be aware that there is science behind this. We don't just go off who shouts loudest. There is a mechanism, and we deploy resources based on the need in quite a sophisticated manner.
And that link with the university, civilian investigators, that works well, and
well, it works really well. The problem we've got is that we develop really prized assets, so we suffer them from other agencies coming in and snatching them. So it's just something that we're going to have to try and adapt to. We're looking at detective now programs, so the national programme to bring in people who want to be detectives. We've had a very successful, I think, internal campaign about looking for existing members of police staff who might want to join us. Carrie's lost a really able member of staff who's gone from the corporate comms team to go and be a fast-track detective. It'll be fantastic. So it's nice that we're doing that, but we are trying to maximise all the opportunities we can to bring through people in an appropriate fashion.
So in terms of just finishing on resources, Commissioner, at this point it would be useful just to mention that's on there, page 22, around the closing phases now of the smart technology that's going to the front line. Again, I think this will be unparalleled. I can't imagine there is a force that's allocating the level of frontline equipment that we have. So each frontline officer now has got one of the latest Samsung smartphones, which has got the Pronto app and a whole range of different apps to allow them to work flexibly without coming back to the station. And then, of course, the very modern version of the Lenovo's that we've had for some 4 or 5 years is now being allocated. There's just Doncaster that are finishing off that rollout towards the end of this month. And that's very timely, as I mentioned, with the challenge around COVID-19. That what we're looking at from the Gold Group is we have a reserve of these, which was for the front line should there be any issues with them. What we're actively looking at now is the front line needs to take care of them. And actually, policing is a contact service. So that front line, there will be some opportunities to go remote, but not many. So we're actually looking at the surplus of this equipment to look at the critical areas of business that we could provide this level of technology to allow them to work remotely should COVID start kicking in. But take that challenge away, we now have got a very capable and agile front line in terms of service delivery to our communities.
The speed with which technology changes is quite breathtaking. When I just think back at the period just that I've been PCC, it's astonishing what changes there have been. And I guess as you look forward the next 5, 10 years, I mean, who knows what lies around the corner. Would it be true to say that because we're getting a lot of relatively young, therefore, police coming over the next 2 or 3 years, they're technologically more savvy than the generations that went before them? Is that our hope? Because most of this would throw me within 5 minutes, I think. But
the teenagers, it's just second nature.
Yeah, the generation coming through now have literally been brought up on screens. They've had some form of screen in front of them. So if we were to offer anything other than the latest technology, that would be alien to them.
But it must make it quite hard for those who've been in the service for quite a while.
You're talking about us, aren't you, Commissioner?
Treading delicately around this one, but no, I mean, no, there was a time when I used to ask my son to help me with, now I ask my grandchildren.
Yeah.
That's the speed of progress.
We're trying to keep up. Dave no longer uses Tipex on his screen.
So, Sophie, get rid of the abacus. That's
And I guess just on that point, recognising that, there are going to be very few solutions where we have the insight as to what is the capacity. We've now a whole series of tech user groups that is absolutely frontline officers who come together. And for example, these Lenovo's, I think we've probably maximised about 5% of what they can offer at the moment, and the solutions and the innovation via the new innovation station are going to come from the front line who say, why don't we? So that there is further huge capacity for us to glean from this technology. It will be very useful in the short term with the challenge around coronavirus, but for overall service delivery, very good in keeping our officers out in communities. Page 22, further details, Commissioner, the work of the Diversity, Confidence and Equality Board. It gives an example there, particularly around the management of an issue that came out from HMIC inspection in custody. That inspection did find some very positive things around. It found good understanding of the public sector equality duty, and we had specific objectives around monitoring detainees for fair and equitable service. It did highlight that we needed to improve on our record keeping around self-defined ethnicity. At that time we were 46% not self-defined. A dashboard's been implemented now, and as you will read, page 22, really good progress has been made from that 46% absence to now being 96.6% compliant. So that has really allowed us, in terms of analysis of outcomes and proportionality around custody, to have much more clarity. Work is now also underway around young people, gender and sexual orientation within custody, and that's more work to come. Page 23 looks at our workforce and representation. We see nationally.
So can I just take you back to,
You can.
You talk about collecting this information about BAME and so on, and then you talk about tackling disproportionality in custody. What does that mean?
In terms
Tackling means
of
what?
disposal routes, so if we look at the difference to caution, charge, you know, in any way, if we're using other community resolutions, it allows us to see, is there any difference in terms of whether it's religious beliefs, race. We can see, are we charging, for example, more people from a BAME background than we are from white British? Before,
so
when we
what
did,
you do next is probably the question.
absolutely.
What do you do next?
Well, I think it gives us the opportunity to understand the issue, because if you've got a 46% non-compliance rate, you're going to be making decisions on an incomplete data set. So the fact that we're now almost at 100% gives us the information set where we can make some informed decisions. We do look on a regular basis about people coming into custody, children, BAME, those sort of things. That will factor into the onward treatment of people as we go forward. So it's an iterative thing, and as trends are identified, if trends are identified, then we'll move to deal with them.
Alan, could I just, I don't want to repeat, I don't want to be in a position of putting in the IEP report to you the same points as are actually being discussed now, so could I just make a comment?
Yeah, of course.
The disproportionality issue, I think, and Mark and I have had this discussion, isn't well understood because we are working on census figures which are now 9 years, is
2011.
it? 2011. Next census is next year. And if you look at the figures coming through for school, those who are in schools, the proportion of BAME pupils is considerably higher than the 11-point-something% of South
33%.
Yorkshire. It's roughly, and
Yes.
that is a Sheffield figure. The
Yeah.
work hasn't been done on the other three boroughs, as I understand it. We just haven't had the statistics to do it. I mean, Michael Lewis has
Yeah.
done the work. So it follows that disproportionality may be considerably lower than if you calculate it on the 2011 census figures, because as BAME figures rise in the community, you would expect a higher number of arrests or custody or stop and search or all the other things which we measure. I just thought it was worth making that point,
No,
because we're trying to work that through in the ethics
Absolutely.
panel.
I think it's a good point, and one that would be very helpful. And the problem is going to be that we'll have these figures locally here because we've done the work, but other forces won't. So they'll still be relying on the 2011 census.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really good, insightful piece of work, and I think Andrew's point's well made, because if we're looking at a 33% as opposed to 11% BAME based in schools, and part of the cohort of school children, or certainly older teenagers, may well feature in stop and search data.
Mm.
So
But we haven't got the figures for the other three boroughs.
No.
I don't know whether, I mean, presumably that could be done because the school statistics must be as available for
presume if
Rotherham,
it's
Barnsley
done
and
in one,
Doncaster.
it'll be done in others.
Would your Sheffield Hallam research be able to get hold of that?
We'd have to, it's probably
Well,
not
that's
going
an
to be on the
obvious
hoof.
route, isn't
Andrew.
it?
We'll probably have
Yeah.
a chat in a IEP, and
Yeah.
if we can do it, because
See
it
what we
is
can
really
do,
valuable
yeah,
insight.
I think it's important. Otherwise, you don't want to be beaten with a stick, which
Exactly.
really shouldn't be there.
But I think part of the point to draw out, and it'll touch on to the later paper about governance and how we address things. Dave's made the point that this came out of a HMIC inspection where it was identified about the need for improvement on recording. There was also comment in that about the need for more timely inspectors reviews. I think when we got the performance data correct, what you've seen is a really stark improvement. So we've got real good position now. That is replicated on the inspectors review position. So the broader point to draw out of that is where we identify these issues, either internally via one of the panels or via HMIC. I'd like to think we're very prompt and assiduous in making sure that we address them,
Sure.
and that we can put a check in place to make sure it's sustained.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Dave.
So page 23, Commissioner, in terms of workforce, just taking the overview there nationally, we see BME 6.9% female, 30.4% representation in South Yorkshire, well placed in terms of ever-growing female representation, higher than the national average of 33.8 locally. Still more work to do, but it's really encouraging signs around moving from our 4.9% BME representation. And of course, the current recruiting campaign is an enormous opportunity that's currently underway. We've reviewed those processes in terms of is there any impact on BME candidates, and that has identified that the very early stages of the online element of the national selection has an unfavourable impact on BME, and we see a disproportionate dropout. So that's subject to a piece of work that the Chief chairs the Diversity, Competence and Equality Board. There's a series of reviews currently underway to look at that and to see if we can feed back in to rectify that. Reassuringly, all other elements of selection, and particularly elements of local selection, shows no disproportionate dropout for BME candidates. So our workforce diversity pleasingly continues to grow. Just moving on from page 23 to 24, internally around fair treatment of our staff. Of course, you'll be aware and familiar with the organisational justice model, where we very much take the approach of learning, not blame. And I'll cover briefly before closing the detail of complaints within the force. We've got an equality hub which coordinates 10 different groups that represent minority groups within the force. So that's faith, race, religion, sexuality. My colleague Lauren Poultney, ACC, chairs that, and those issues that come out of that group are fed into Tactical Change Board and then Strategic Change Board, which the Chief chairs. We saw from the Police Foundation last year in June that they made comment that key to well-being was members of staff having a say. Via that Equality Hub, via Innovation Station, which has gone live last month, and via our Fairness and Ethics portal, I would present that we really do allow our staff to have loud voice. And if we look at recent past in terms of significant strategic change within the force, the operating model, the service delivery from districts, the service delivery of putting neighbourhoods back in, local CID returning to districts, the evolution of problem solving, and having, as I've already spoken around, the very best technology and kit, all was influenced from the voice within the organisation. We've gone live, as I say, with Innovation Station, which again allows people to highlight very quickly what localised hindrance blockers are, what stops us offering outstanding service delivery, so we can action those very quickly. So I think with all that in mind, of course there's always more to do, but I think we are very much a listening organisation where you can have your say.
You reference at bottom of page 25 the work of the ethics panel and artificial intelligence and so on. There is clearly a lot of public interest around this. Only this morning, 2 more emails on facial recognition. We've been having 1 or 2. I think there's probably a lot of interest being fostered by particular organisations or groups within South Yorkshire at the moment around that. But we can send them a good report there because of the work that the ethics panel have done.
And have I lost my opportunity to talk about the workforce? Because David went on quite quickly. Shall I come back to that at the end?
You've always got your bit at the end. So.
Well, I was going to try and avoid doing that.
I should do it now. do it now.
Well, the point about proportionality, of course, operates in the other direction on workforce, because if the BAME population of South Yorkshire is considerably greater than it was in 2011, then the shortfall or the disproportionality in recruitment or employment becomes potentially greater, yes. Correspondingly greater. It's stuck fairly steadily at 4.9%, as I understand it, over certainly the last year or 2, I think. And I know that some measures are being taken to try and improve the proportion, in particular a positive action programme, details which I'm afraid I don't have, but David may. So I think that does need keeping an eye on, because 4.9% as against 11.9 is one thing, but 4.9% against a higher figure, which is, and in any event is lower than the national rate of BAME police officers, is obviously a cause for some concern.
Yeah. No, I think that point is is well made and taken. But,
yeah, I mean, conscious of it, we certainly build that into the recruitment to try and make sure that we welcome as broad a cross-section of the community as possible into the service so that we're representative of it. Positive news on that, we were one of very few police forces nationally who were recognised as one of the top 50 diversity employees in the country last year, which was a real testament, I think, because we need to make sure that we've got a supportive environment for all our staff. But I think that was good, positive external recognition of the fact of the type of organisation we are, so we're conscious of it. It is absolutely something that we'll focus on as we go through the recruitment drive, but obviously we want the best possible people to come and work for the force, but from all sections of the community.
and the male-female imbalance or disproportionality in my office is considerable. We really will.
We're doing our bit to redress the balance.
David,
Commissioner, if we look at page 26, we took around then that external fairness and service delivery. We get the view there of satisfaction, so this is truly representative views directly from the voice of our victims who had a service from us in terms of that whole experience. And this is, for the data you see on page 26, is an improving picture in terms of the last quarter. So what we can see there is October to December, where we see overall satisfaction levels for attended crime at 77%, which is improving. And then sitting below that, at the foot of page 26, you can see the different crime types. Sitting behind this, we've got real insight into how easy as an organisation we were to contact, what the initial actions were like, what the investigation was like, the follow-up contact. So it gives us real great insight. I have to say, taking the figures for January alone, we set an ambition in October that by April of this year to try and get to 90% satisfaction levels in terms of overall service delivered for attended incidents. Very stretching target. Encouragingly, from January alone, we see the figures for overall satisfaction for attended crimes move to 89%, so almost there. Led by Sheffield, who've got 94% overall satisfaction, Doncaster at 90%, Rotherham very close behind, as you'll hear in a moment from Chief Superintendent Jennings, at 88%. And reassuringly, for the number one, what matters most across our communities is burglary dwelling, and the satisfaction level for those three districts, particularly for January alone, are 100%, 100%, and 89% for those three districts leading the way. So some really encouraging signs as we move towards lifting that experience, and we can see the difference there from where we were in the last quarter of around 77%. So very much a sense of really improving to outstanding level of service to people who are unfortunately victims within South Yorkshire. Page 27 really speaks to the reinvestment in local hate crime coordinators. What came out of the Gold Review in early autumn last year that we saw from victims of hate crime, that the service levels there were not where we'd want to be. It was fragmented, there was little consistency. The lift that we're seeing towards 100% now in some areas, and certainly towards 90%, we've now absolutely got consistency across all districts with hate crime coordinators, real intrusion and support from sergeants, personal 7-day reviews from someone of sergeant rank, and really a detailed breakdown in all of that process that supports our victims who've been subject to any form of hate crime, which is really where we need to maintain and continue with that. In terms of a fair complaint system, in closing, Commissioner, in terms of HMIC, looking at the whole process around professional standards and complaints, you'll be aware that in terms of legitimacy, we were graded good, and in terms of ethical and lawful behaviour, we were graded outstanding. Very much, this is the DEPS portfolio, so you may want to speak more on this, but in essence, that sense of organisational justice, of being an organisation that takes opportunity to learn rather than moving immediately to punitive, has really delivered. Of course, there are elements where people are either so reckless or are performing to a point where it is misconduct. That doesn't mean we are in any way a soft organisation. It just means we are a very proportionate organisation that allows people the breathing space to make honest mistakes, but for those who step over the line, again, face full due accountability. So the sense of all that really is that I think there's a lot to celebrate within South Yorkshire in terms of both internal and external fairness. Of course, there's always more to do. We've got a real opportunity with the changing the culture with the significant pipeline of new starters. But I think that the foundation that we've got in terms of the approach to fairness serves us very well, and we can indeed be optimistic.
Thank you very much indeed. Does anybody else want to comment? Sharon, did you want to say anything about the work you're doing? Or?
Want to come on?
Come on. Okay. Everybody happy? Well, thank you very much indeed. Then. That's a good report. That was item 11. We're on to item 12, which is the Rotherham District summary update, and Superintendent Jennings, Chief Superintendent Jones and Superintendent Chapman are here. I think what I'll do here is perhaps go through I assume everybody's read it. I'll just pick out one or two things, Una, and if then you feel we've missed something that you really wanted to speak out today, then do say so. Thank you for the accompanying slides.
Give you a flavour of what's going on in Rotherham, sir?
We'll glance that way every so often. Thank you very much indeed. Let me take you then into the report, and if I go to first of all to page 38, taking you on a little bit, this is response times, which this is under the heading of performance, so response times. I was particularly interested in this because you've obviously got response times down, and I wonder if you'd just say a little bit around that, and I suppose the things that concern or interest me is A, whether this is something which, I mean, you suggest this is something that can then be rolled out across the other districts, but whether it has some impact on resourcing. Do you have to take people from somewhere in order to do this? It's what the consequences are of focusing on this and getting these times down.
Response times for us were a real area of focus over the last 10 months. In essence, really, we were focused on getting it right first time when we received a call for service from a member of the public in Rotherham. And a big part of that is, of course, getting to that member of the public within our aspirational target time, 50 minutes for an emergency response, an hour for our priority response call for service. And you can see the trajectory of change that we've been able to make manifest in Rotherham really since the beginning of the summer, through some of our peak demand periods, through some of our areas and times of business when we have most people on annual leave. For us, it's something that we think is absolutely sustainable, and something that we have been involved in with our SLT in industrialising and rolling out across the rest of the force. It pivots on the concept of having a dedicated resource management sergeant, which isn't an additional sergeant, but if you think about practically what that looks like in Rotherham, for each of our response groups we will have 4 allocated supervisors. We've reduced that down to 3 actually, and each of those 3 supervisors then will have a distinct function across the 24/7 cycle. And one of those distinct functions is the resource management function, which means that we are identifying proactively resources to respond to calls for service in a preemptive fashion, if you will. And you can see that best illustrated in figure 4 when we talk about force level trends around priority incidents, and what has become a bit of a vernacular description when we talk about the jam and the sandwich, the red area that you can see in the graphs, which is the amount of time it takes our dispatchers to find a resource to allocate the jobs to, which we have been squeezing really sustainably well since May of this year, which generally means that actually our sergeants are identifying the actual asset to deploy to that job before our dispatcher has to come and actually look for it. And you can see that now starting to take effect across the other districts, which is why we've seen response times at a force level start to reduce as they start to implement some of the best practice that we developed in Rotherham. So for us, we probably are now at a point where actually it's sustainably embedded in terms of our cultural practices locally. We don't think we'll see any major improvements, but we're delighted with the fact that, you know, sustainably we are achieving above 90% both in relation to emergency and priority response times. And it is something now that we're seeing roll out across the rest of the force.
Are people driving faster?
No.
Can I just do that one because I've been absolutely, explicitly clear about this. And this is not about cops driving faster. It's not about cops being put under pressure to drive faster. And I think I've been very directive with district commanders that I absolutely do not want that behaviour, and we will monitor it. And you will always get incidents where people try to do the right thing, push too hard, but organisationally the message is this is not about driving faster. As Una's pointed out, I think it is the jam in the sandwich bit. This is about people, when the job comes in, when it's created, it's about the effective management and deployment of a resource to the right resource at the right time. And what we've done is reduce that so that we're actually getting people away quicker. So the bits I expect districts to do is understand demand. So are the shifts aligning the right way? Is the crewing policy right? Are the deployment bases right? Certainly in Doncaster, Sean's reviewed his deployment bases to try and make sure that we get good coverage of the county. And actually the resources are starting out from a place that maximises their chance of actually hitting a response time in very much the way that ambulances don't sit in ambulance stations. They have deployment points which are predetermined to try and hit most demand most of the time. And we need to be realistic that if there is an occasional sporadic call from a remote area of the county, then unless we're lucky, we're probably not going to hit that. But what we've got to do is concentrate on the bulk areas and try and ensure that we hit them as much as we can, because candidly, if the public dial 999, they expect a police officer to be there as quickly as they can. So it's an absolute core deliverable for us. We're looking about doing things in an intelligent way, and it is absolutely not any pressure for the officers to drive quickly. The Federation were at the last force performance meeting, so they've heard it directly, being told to district commanders, and the expectation is to be smart, not just drive faster.
Yeah. And telematics, presumably, would enable you to know whether that was the case or not. So
and actually the graphs illustrate that. If you look at the blue part of the graphs, that's the district time. So the point from it's allocated to Una Jennings, Response Officer A, how long it takes them for me to actually deploy. And you can see that's consistently stayed pretty much the same. The real net benefit, the 40% advantage that we have in some of our nearest comparators is in that dispatch time, is in identifying the resource in the first instance to actually allocate the job to.
No, it all looks very good.
Commissioner, if I may, just on the point that you queried around, will this go to the rest of the force? Una, very kindly, there was a key chief inspector who drove the implementation in Rotherham, and you can see that impact. You can almost map when that chief inspector went on the road and visited other districts at that district commander's behest. And you can see that, you know, the other districts follow suit then. Sheffield is still the one which has perhaps got a little bit more to glean. And in our uplift plans, taking that principle of a resource management sergeant, and we see what we've got from the resource available now, we committed 22 constables value to an incident support hub in the 151 for the uplift. So further investment around how do we manage that experience from first contact at Atlas Court through to an officer attending and responding. So there will, of course, we will get to a point, and I think Rotherham's not very far away from it now, where you reach a baseline of maintenance. I think there is still more to be gleaned from the other districts, but as you can see, the direction of travel is very much force-wide it's in the right direction.
Good, but as you say, maintaining then what you've got is then becomes the name of the game. Can I move you on to, I say I may well miss things that you want to come back to or comment on. Page 46, Operation Shield, because I've now come across a number of communities and community groups who have commented very favourably on Operation Shield, which is the use of smart water to mark people's property. And you've got some figures here for the effect it has on recorded burglaries offences in particular parts of Rotherham, Rawmarsh, Down, 12.5%, Dinnington, 31.3% seems remarkable, and Wingfield, 40%. I suppose the question is the intention that this rolls out everywhere, or are you highlighting particular places?
Where we're prioritising first, looking essentially at where we had our hotspots for burglary, as you might imagine, aligned with where our local councillors felt there was the greatest need for reassurance, and then overlaid actually with the households that had the lowest level of home security, which invariably aligns with our areas of highest deprivation, as you might imagine. So we took quite a smart approach to how we roll out Shield across Rotherham. and it's been universally welcomed, I think. We are hoping to make our town centre actually the first town centre in South Yorkshire that is smart water protected, so that we're really just trying to develop that sense of security and just make sure that we build on the success we've had around the reductions that we've seen this quarter in relation to burglary. I think we're tracking around 23% based on year-on-year comparative figures across the piece. And we're not necessarily seeing that displacement into other crime types that we were perhaps concerned about prior to Christmas in relation to our commercial burglaries. So yeah, I mean, for us, we will take this as far as we possibly can, funding allowing, because actually I think our communities really welcome it, and it's really well received. I actually just had it in my own house in Sheffield in the last week, which was lovely, and the officers were great. So
I think the approach we took,
It's a prime hotspot, I would have thought.
well, I do live in a ropey area, that's for sure.
if you recall, we benefit from some funding from yourself. What we wanted to do as a force was roll it out, get proof of concept, and then encourage others to support either local authorities or other groups who could then invest with confidence that this was a worthwhile thing to do. And when you look at the costs of burglaries, if you're a housing provider and your premise is subject to a burglary, it's incredibly distressing for the family involved, but equally there's a significant cost. So for a fraction of a cost, a housing provider can implement some of the measures that we've put in place. It's better for them because it reduces costs, it reduces insurance costs, and as you've seen, we get some good results. So we will roll it out as far as we possibly can, either from our pockets, your pockets, or anyone who wants to work with us to try and target hardened area.
And part of the deterrent effect is people get to know, I mean, potential offenders get to know that an area has been treated that way. And I know when I was up at Cleveland Valley, you've got badges on lampposts. Does that follow everywhere, or is that?
Yeah, and you can see the stencils on the footpaths. In fact, we had one prolific burglar we spoke about at our last public accountability meeting, and part of our tactical management of that young man when he was released was that we Operation Shielded his house, his family home, stenciled the markings outside, so he was very, very visually aware of the fact that he was no longer welcome to operate in Rotherham with the same level of prolificacy that he had up until that point.
I did have someone ask me in Swinton, sort of question they always ask me in Swinton, was whether it simply displaced people from one area to another, but there's no evidence of that.
We're not seeing that displacement, and we're not seeing it to other crime types either. But I do think that's part of the robust management that we're able to put around some of our SAC offenders in Rotherham, because we have slightly smaller numbers, thankfully, than other larger districts. We can really have a full spectrum, I suppose, approach to them when they come out, of which this is one part.
You're on to page 49, and you talk about recovery of assets there and the use of poker money, and in that first paragraph towards the end, you talk about £25,000 of cash being recovered there. We had a report from Barnsley, I'm not sure it was the last panel or the one before, where they were talking about really very considerable, 300,000 if I remember rightly. I guess it's your aspiration to raise poker money, because we have this third division, don't we, of poker money. But do you just want to comment around that?
Absolutely. We were the last district to get our financial investigator fully embedded. Actually, just at the end of this month, we'll see that now made manifest. So our hope is that once we have that person working with our investigative resource locally, Barnsley have had 12, 18 months head start on us, that we may well start to see some of those real tangible benefits of having that co-location and joint approach. A lot of the money that I've been able to see that we've been able to recover in Barnsley has been really brought around from that joint investigative mindset from the very outset of an investigative response. So I think that whilst we're delighted with what we are achieving here in Rotherham, I think overall across the year we have one of the highest levels of cash seized outside of Sheffield, if not the highest. I think we'll only see that grow now with that financial investigator coming to work with us locally now at the end of this month.
Okay. If we can turn the page to page 50, you talk there at the bottom of the page, it's under the heading Partners, and you talk about the embedded mental health worker and the importance and significance. I have met him, he's in Riverside, isn't he? And, but when I met him and was talking about, as I understood it, his contract was a short-term contract, or at least he wasn't. And I just wonder how that's, because clearly you want someone who knows what they're doing, you want them there, and you want them ongoing, you don't want them disappearing.
Yeah, Commissioner, on that, I think when the public's telling us and all our partners are telling us it's a good role, it's what we wanted to keep. So under the Safer Rotherham partnership, that's now a funded post.
Oh.
And in place.
Oh, that's really good then, yes. And is that unique to Rotherham, or is this copied elsewhere?
That's my understanding. Certainly we didn't have it in Sheffield, but I think potentially given the benefit that we've seen locally, it's one that the other local authorities may well want to consider. And of course they're funding this post as well, so it really is for them to make the decision.
So it's fully funded by Rotherham Borough Council. Well, it's a really...
Partnership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Barnsley have some mental health offer, don't they, Dave? Does it ring a bell?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Moving on to page 60. I'm sorry, these are some big jumps here. Page 61, demand reduction, and you talk about the places where demand on the force is very high, and you work to get that down, and you reference the hospital demand. I wonder if you could just say a little bit around that and how that is how that's been done.
Yeah, well, that's been about building, Commissioner, a good relationship with the hospital. So our middle managers and frontline PCs pay regular attention to the hospital, build those relationships at the peak times of demand. So when we have our holiday periods, our Christmas periods, we look to work more closely, invest resources with the hospitals at that time, or the hospital. We also have a missing from home policy, which is everybody understands from both the hospital and from the policing side of things. So we're not routinely getting people reported missing from the hospital without the due diligence checks being done in the first instance. It's just a really good partnership, problem-solving approach to that initial demand that comes throughout the year, and then also the peak times for demand. And we keep that going.
We can see that reduction in terms of missing from home episodes at the hospital. It's down by nearly 50% last year. And for most of our hospitals, that would be one of our big demand generators, certainly, as a force would be responding to people who have made themselves absent from the wards or for treatment. So those relationships and a clear understanding of what our shared roles and responsibilities are, as well as the obligations we both have as public sector bodies in this area, I think has made manifest some really sustainable improvements in that area for us.
I mentioned earlier that some of the formatting is a bit adrift in the report. If we could time it, there's some innovative spelling as well. Got a hospital security manger, which is an interesting idea, but I guess it's not.
It's barnstorming.
Taking you on to page 63, could you say a little bit around community action partnerships and these meetings that you're fostering, because I think that's a really important domain.
Yeah. Well, it was probably about 2 years ago, Commissioner, that we set up the community action partnerships. These meetings are over 21 wards and happen monthly. It was an opportunity for us to be able to feed out messages in the community, but equally pull local community intelligence out, and that would feed up into our fortnightly tasking meetings across the district. Quite often these are chaired by local councillors, local members, and with respect of that, we've got them embedded, they're in place now. The improvements that are ongoing is about having consistency and corporacy across these meetings, so pretty much a set agenda which flows through from the Safer Rotherham Partnership and the Rotherham Together Partnership all the way through to our plan on a page and through to making sure that just the localised issues also get dealt with. It's working really well. We did a review on it probably about 8 months ago now. The SRP did the review, and 75% of the meetings were running really well. There was 25% where there was some consistency issues, some corporacy needed. And as the boss has rightly pointed out, at this moment in time, just to really get a feel for these 21 meetings, I chair the one at Wickersley. Normally you would have a PC or a sergeant would probably chair if it wasn't going to be a local councillor. But it's just to make sure that we understand as a police service what these meetings should look like and actually what are the outcomes that's coming from it. It's going well.
So you're there at every meeting? Police are at every meeting of these?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because what people tell me elsewhere is that they don't mind, they understand if police can't get to every meeting every month, but if they knew they were coming every other month or so, it's the consistency that people want.
And I think we really worked hard on that, haven't we? Because the feedback was that we weren't overly consistent, and we had a range of people from either the local neighbourhood inspector to PCSO necessarily chairing them. And I think our approach is really that we're assigned when around who chairs the meeting. The real issue is it effective? Is it actually delivering what the community needs and holding people to account for what we as a partnership should be delivering here in Rotherham locally? And I think some of the support, the constructive challenge we've had from Sharon Kemp from our MBC has been really helpful in that area. We have our next Dragon's Den now at the end of the month where we have each of our units come and actually pitch to Sharon and I and really present in a very overt fashion some of the real and manifest work that's been ongoing, and part of that has definitely been around achieving that consistency, both around recording what we're actually discussing in each meeting and making sure that those agendas line up with the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and then measuring back what we're actually doing month to month.
Okay. Tell us about the Dragon's Den. This is, did you say monthly?
No, it's quarterly. Well,
Quarterly.
every 6 months, is it? So we had one about 6 months ago, and so the format is we generally come up to the town hall, and then each of our CAPS partnerships come and they present a case study around the work that they've done locally. Now the big focus for Sharon and I in this next one will be around that tasking and accountability process, because like lots of areas of business, there are certain I suppose areas that lend themselves more to that quite pithy business type model approach in terms of actually what does the rhythm around accountability look like as aligned to outcomes. And we find that our neighbourhoods sometimes were just slightly adrift, and you weren't able to necessarily just really tangibly articulate the progress that was being made. So what we decided to do was give them this opportunity once every 6 months to come and showcase some of the work, and it also allowed us to provide that constructive challenge back. So yeah, she was very positive about it.
And probably one thing, Commissioner, I would add to that is part of the learning has been around organised crime. So, you know, quite often people think is that something that really wants to be discussed in the community action partnership, but the local communities quite often want to know what's happening in their area, and it's also one of the SRP priorities, which is organised crime. So clearly we can't give sensitive information out, we can't give specific names out, but what we can do is link it up, and what we've done over the last week is link up our organised crime disruption panel, which talks about organised crime groups, look at where there's key themes which have happened over the last 2 months, which is how often that group sits. And then that gets fed into the local community action partnership via their manager, and they'll talk about, so for example, Wickersley, we had some, we'd had some firearms discharges up in that area, and found some cannabis cultivations. It was right that we put something in just to give some reassurance around being a targeted dispute between organised crime groups, that it was linked to drugs, and that actually what we would want from the community, if we actually smell drugs in that local area, then we'd like to hear about it. If we see anything which is untoward, we would like to hear about it. So we now start to link organised crime into the partnerships to be able to pass key messages out, but equally get community intelligence.
Yeah, of course. That's very good. Where is it you live, Fiona? Good to know Wickersley being looked after. I don't think I got anything else that I wanted to comment on myself, but if there's something you want to raise, that you think we ought to hear about, we've read the report.
No, not at all, Commissioner. I mean, I think the only thing that I would like to mention is just the staff that are working with us here in Rotherham. Sure. I've worked across 2 police forces now in the last 18 years, and I can genuinely say hand in heart that the people that I'm working with in Rotherham are some of the best that I've ever seen. They are working incredibly hard here in this district every single day. We've got some of the lowest sickness figures in force now. I think this week we're sitting at 3.1%. Not a single response officer in Rotherham district is on sick leave currently. And they really, really are working incredibly hard, and I think the report reflects some of that real focused hard work and diligent effort they're making here to keep people safe every day in the town and the surrounding countryside. And I'm very proud of them. They're a great bunch, and I think we should be too. They're really wonderful cops.
And we are. And we see their photographs here and on the screen. So,
I'll just say, I think, Una couldn't say it, but I think her, Steve and the rest of the command team just done an exceptional job over the last periods. We have got some really good, excellent people internally, but I think equally we've benefited from really good inputs. You know, you've got a range of perspective. Una's come from Northern Ireland, Steve came from Durham, working together with our local people. We've got a really good, strong command team there. And I think the focus is performance issues, but more importantly, the intelligent approach. So understand your problems, deal with them, break down issues into pieces where you can address them. That is a real testament to outstanding leadership, and I think Rotherham have got outstanding leadership with the command team. And I think the last point mentioned there about the sickness is equally important, because sickness obviously is manifest from people's health conditions, but you don't get such good sickness levels if the staff aren't being looked after and treated in the appropriate way. I think you've only got to go and have a look at the inside of Rotherham and the improvements made to the environment which support the well-being of the staff. That talks to a very good, rounded leadership team. So I think the people of Rotherham and Shell should be very confident they're being very well served by a very effective unit here in Rotherham.
I think we can also echo that in terms of the work the office does around assurance of performance. We attend the Force Performance Day, we attend quarterly reviews. I don't think our staff have ever seen such a quick turnaround in performance from where it was to how it's improved under the current leadership. And I know, Una, you set 3 priorities, if I remember rightly. One was domestic abuse response times. I forget the third, but when you have a look at outstanding suspect reductions in here, that the report really showcases that turnaround.
and I have been to Main Street and noted the pastel shades of the walls, which is a vast improvement on what was there before. So, yeah, and a calming effect it must have on those who are going there. Thank you very much. It's a very good report, a very full report, and thank you for it. Shall we move to item 13 then, which is Project Nova? David, I'm going to come to you. This is something which is dear to my own heart because, as you point out, South Yorkshire has a very large number of families here who have been in the forces or related people who have been in the forces, and we know that not everybody settles back into communities well. Most do, but some don't, and come into contact with the police. So I'm supportive of this. I used to be paid by the Ministry of Defence at one time to, oh yes, to teach ethics to the military. So yeah, I spent part of my time in RAF Cramwell and Amport and Portsmouth with the naval people, and then Paderborn in Germany, doing teaching there. So I've always had a keen interest in members of the armed forces and what happens to them when they leave. So tell us about that.
Absolutely, and fairly brief item, but I guess links with my earlier update around fairness of, well, how do we understand our communities, in particular vulnerabilities within communities. And as you identified, you know, we've got 150,000 people within our communities within South Yorkshire that have some family linkage or themselves have been part of armed forces. And a little under a year ago, in July, you may recall the Chief, on a very blisteringly hot day on Devonshire Green, publicly signed up to the Armed Forces Covenant. And that was really the headline of our commitment. What flowed from that then was re-engaging with a real purpose with Project Nova. And they became a key partner in this. But first, I guess on page 75, just to highlight, after our commitment under the Covenant, what did we do? Firstly, the main way that we communicate with our organisation around service delivery is Street Skills, where we bring all of our frontline staff into Dyson House and give input. And the Covenant and Project Nova featured heavily in a quarter's worth of input. And as you will see there, 54 briefing sessions, 1,100 police officers and support staff received that input. And commendable to Project Nova that they were there face to face on all 54 of those briefing sessions. So that really is a heavy commitment. When I do my input, I take the easier route, which is some form of video blog, rather than trying to find time for 54. Project Nova and Inspector Dave Struggles were there face to face to deliver this message in person. So the three elements that you see there, one is to raise awareness that we have this 11% representation in terms of armed forces community within the county. We then highlight the real vulnerabilities and challenges linked to that: mental health, PTSD, alcohol, drugs, homelessness, domestic abuse. And then perhaps most importantly, well, here's what we can do. Once we've recognised that challenge, if we come into contact either through vulnerability on the street or indeed through exercising our powers and custody processes, this is where Project Nova, along with Walking with Wounded and other partners, can really offer some support at that time of crisis. So we make this input, and then you think, well, we hope that has a positive impact. Now, in my pack, the figures supporting this have been thrown a little bit, so I don't know if that is shown for the rest, that some of the figures came out, but I've kind of summarised those, that what we've seen from the last year working with Project Nova within South Yorkshire is 278 referrals, of which 216 have flowed from South Yorkshire Police, which we should be very proud of. It's not a competition, but what the figures do highlight there, for example, NHS across South Yorkshire, 3 referrals in the year, Prison Service 2, and single figures pretty much across other key bodies, the way you would expect potentially greater support. From our 216, 162, not surprisingly, have flowed from our custody process. Again, if we look at that total of 216 from our organisation, we've only got 2 points of references to other forces: homicide 19 within the year and Cheshire Police 1 within the year. So lots of activity there. Flowing from the 216 that we made the referral there, 54 are currently receiving support and a coordinated multi-agency support, and 40 are established, so they're already embedded, receive support, and that is underway. So I think in summary, what we look from that raised awareness and the links with Project Nova, we've taken 278 people who've got armed forces background, put over 100 of those into direct support. There's been referrals for the others. So whether you look at this from a human point of view or a business point of view, we're directly supporting a vulnerable element of our community. This is absolutely partnership based. Our core policing principles around problem solving, early intervention, that's all the way through this. You look at the demand that potentially would have flowed from those 278 if we hadn't offered some support in terms of diversion and support with lifestyle. And I'll not go through all of the figures. I think that really speaks for itself, and from some of the pie charts within there, you can see that 44% of those that came into contact have got mental health problems. You see the pie charts there that only 17% are either owner-occupier, the rest are either supported housing, at home with parents, homeless, rented, sleeping on sofas. It gives a real sense to the vulnerability within that community, and really our commitment through the Covenant is to do all that we can with key partners to support them.
I do think this is an important one. Dave's led it together with Dave Struggles, who's now our inspector in training, based on the fact that we think it's important to put our best people in training. This isn't featuring anywhere on HMIC. It doesn't feature anywhere on anything that prompts us to do it. We just took the view that really there's a moral obligation to look after service personnel, and it's the right thing to do. I think, you know, Dave and Dave have led it really well. And it's something as a force we should be proud of, just as much as positive numbers. It is actually doing the right thing by people who serve the country.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, those who have seen active service as well, they've put their lives on the line for us, and it's just, I just feel so sorry that they don't always get back into civilian life as well as we would hope. And I'm glad you referenced the signing of the military covenant. It's very easy. It's one of those things that's very easy to do. Everybody signs the military covenant, but what do you do about it afterwards? And it's a really good example of the force doing really well, very well by them. So, thank you very much indeed. Any comments or questions? Shall we come then to Chief Executive updates? First of all, item 14, services for victims of crime. Sharon, this is you, 8.
Just going
Is it Michelle? Right.
Just going to start it off, Commissioner, just to position it really in terms of why you asked for a report to come here. I think going around the various districts, there was a lack of awareness really in terms of the services for victims that are provided from you and your office and your statutory role in relation to victims. So the beginning of this report just sets out a bit of background in relation to your role and responsibilities. It talks about your responsibility for commissioning victim services in the police force area. It talks about the various funds that are provided and aggregated to allow you to put together services based on either contracts, grants or co-commissions that are listed there at the bottom of page 83, top of page 84. The most recent of those really is the Early Intervention Youth Fund, which has allowed some services for victims. The one that's put on a regional basis, and in fact we were talking about it yesterday with regional partners, is the Sexual Assault Referral Centre, a state-of-the-art facility in South Yorkshire. So those are they. You also asked for something to come to the board which explains the work in the assurance area of the office around compliance with the Victims Code of Practice. So Sharon's just going to describe that work, and there's an appendix as well. So Sharon, over to you.
Okay, so there's been quite a lot happening from a wider kind of Ministry of Justice government point of view around the Victims Code, I guess through the course of 2018 and into 2019, the launch of the Victim Strategy in September 2018, and following on from that, the local Criminal Justice Board for South Yorkshire commissioned a piece of assurance work in relation to the Victims Code and understanding how the criminal justice agencies are doing in terms of the key entitlements for victims, which are referenced a little bit further down. So the key entitlements are the fact that victims have been informed at key stages of the case, including kind of arrest, bail and charge, referrals to organisations supporting victims of crime, regular updates on case progress, victim personal statements, which is kind of a key bit, and are they taken and is their use communicated to victims, and the victim contact scheme, which is to provide eligible victims with an opportunity to kind of be kept updated for those that are victims of crime where offenders are sentenced to 12 months or more, so that's a probation entitlement. So this piece of work was very much in collaboration with criminal justice partners, and given that a lot of those entitlements kind of sit under policing and the work that the police do, out of that piece of work came a number of suggested areas of focus. And it has to be said actually that lots of those areas of focus were already kind of well underway, and I think particularly in relation to the work that Superintendent Chapman's doing with complete victim care and the governance around that. So things like agreeing a contact contract with victims, so that victims from the very start of their journey are clear on when they're going to be contacted by police, and that is done at the earliest opportunity. Ensuring that the clarity of communication with victims, so avoiding abbreviations and not assuming that they always understand the terminology within the criminal justice system. Exploring opportunities where appropriate to kind of revisit the offer of victim support. It's not always the right time right at the start of that victim journey, and often, particularly with complex investigations, there's an opportunity to look at that again and make sure that victim is aware of the victim support services that are commissioned and that they can be referred at any point. Use of scrutiny panels are another good example, and really capturing the voice of the victim, and I think that's something that we would like to do some more of going into kind of 2020 and 2021. So I think in summary, yes, there were a number of suggested areas of focus, but work is already well underway with all the criminal justice partners, in particular South Yorkshire Police, in relation to kind of driving that forward and making sure that those victim entitlements under VCOP continue to be monitored and reviewed. And I think there are some kind of particular pieces of work in relation to force-wide scrutiny panels that are underway. Hate crime, force-wide scrutiny panel is, that process has started. There's some really great work coming out of that. And particularly ensuring the victims are provided with the victim booklet, and that's been a really big focus by the force, to make sure that they have the victim booklet containing the support organisations, but also the officer contact details, and that should, you know, be done absolutely at the start of that investigation. So we will continue, obviously, to commission and monitor services that support the victims of crime, but also do some more work in relation to listening to the victim voice. I think that's all right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Steve, do you want to comment at all from your point of view, the work you do?
Yeah, Commissioner, simple things. That is the 3 principles of CVC really, which is, right, as soon as you get this investigation, make sure you're in contact, identify yourself, leave your contact details, and make sure you agree that contract upon when you're going to get back in touch with that person or persons. And guess what? When you agree it, stick to it. And then the 3rd element is about, we refreshed all of the victim booklet. As a force, we didn't use it as often as we should have done. So from about 2 years ago, we refreshed it all up. We saw feedback from services, from your good selves, put it into a sizable document, and put it out there, and then really started to drive it. And it allows, there's a point on that page there, for the officers to put their details, their crime reference numbers, what they're investigating, etc., also to comply with the victim support practice. And I think the final point I would say, Sharon's point's well made, those recommendations that are in there, there is a lot of them that we're on with, but some of them we know we've got work to do. We've discussed them, they're being progressed through the group. So if you've localised it more, for example, Rotherham, if you were to look into this pack, you'll see that we've had presentations from victim support in our business days. We've also ensured they're in the appropriate location within the building to be able to, so that when the cops are walking past, that they can actually think, actually that person might not have wanted victim services beforehand. I think they do now. And probably the final bit is to actually, as part of the force-wide refresh, we have really focused on that victim voice. So what we've got is Mr. Hartley actually saying, look, you know, we're getting better folks. You really need to focus on updating our victims on what we actually do, and then making sure that we do the follow-up, so actions and follow-up. And then we bring a lady out who didn't get the best service from us, so as much as we're getting better, that victim's voice said, hey, this is what you did for us on this particular day. And that's about really getting to the emotions and, you know, the emotional intelligence of police officers to think, when we don't get it right, this is what it looks like.
Can I just add as well, Commissioner, that as Sharon outlined, this is work that's been done with all criminal justice partners who've all got responsibilities with victims. Now, not all victims and survivors want a criminal justice outcome, as we know, but those that do, we're just trying to drill down into where victims are experiencing good service across the whole system, and we know we've got an issue with victims staying with the criminal justice process. So Sharon presented to the local criminal justice board, and we know we're having conversations with courts around court sitting days, delays in the system that are not with the police. I know this board, Public Accountability Board, is focused with the police, but we are doing work on your behalf across the whole criminal justice system to improve the victim staying with the journey.
I think just on a final note as well, I'm really hoping that some of this work that's happening and continuing to take place is starting to translate now into the victim satisfaction figures, and hopefully that will continue.
Thank you, and thank you for this and what you're doing, and glad to hear it's feeding in the way you've described. And we may come back to this again, I think, in X months' time and see how it's worked around. Anybody else want to? Happy with that. Thank you very much. Shall we move to item 15? Michelle.
Just a quick update on another piece of assurance activity done on your behalf in relation to neighbourhood policing. So we were hearing from the force that neighbourhood policing was being embedded across all 4 districts, and that the results were improving problem solving and customer experience, etc. but we needed to test that and do some reality testing on your behalf in terms of assurance activity. So we began a project with support from Chief Superintendent Green, and it moved across to his successor in relation to terms of reference that would test the effectiveness of the model in delivering the 4 promises the Chief Constable had made to the public after consultation with the public on what they wanted to see. And just a reminder, the public wanted to see greater visibility, increased levels of accessibility, increased levels of interactions and tackling antisocial behaviour and crime, not surprisingly. So face-to-face surveys have been conducted by the assurance staff in the office, but supported by Fiona's team engagement officers, face-to-face surveys across the 4 districts, and trying to target those people that wouldn't normally do online surveys. So we're going to interchanges, supermarkets, colleges and the like to do interviews. We're aiming to get over 600 surveys done. We've completed about a third, so we've still got progress to make. So
2/3.
2/3, apologies. So we've got another week commencing this week, and then we're hoping that the analysis can be done. Early findings are that very positive. There are some areas to improve, but generally people are seeing that improved policing presence in our districts. So I'm not going to go into any other detail about the results because they may well change when we finish the other third. Given the purdah period, we'll judge how much of this is business as usual to return when it's ready, and how much we'll have to await the PCC elections before we formally report back.
So we'll probably report internally to the Trust and Confidence Board in April, chaired by ICT Hartman.
Okay, everybody happy? Item 16 is PCC decisions. Ms. Charles, is you again 89 to 90.
Yep, just in terms of the decisions being made since the last board, there are 3 there through the community grant scheme that are set out in the table. I wasn't proposing to say any more than that, Commissioner, unless there's any questions.
Are there any questions? Fine. We'll see that. On to the assurance panel reporting, and by exception there's an independent ethics panel report 91 to 94. Andrew?
Thank you, Alan. I've already dealt with some aspects of this during ACC Hartley's report, so just very quickly, can I pick out on page 91 over to 92 our work on monitoring complaints, in particular the complaints reforms, which came into force at the beginning of February. So far, there's according to the report we had, there's been nothing troubling. Resources issues have been sorted out. Our lead member, Mrs. Janet Wheatley, intends to do some dip sampling, both with PSD's permission in PSD's handling, and also your own departments, your own office's handling, Alan, in terms of the reviews which now fall to your office to do. When we had our meeting, there had been no applications for a review. I'm not sure if that's still the same 2 weeks later. 1, okay, as Ali's just said. So that is in hand, and we intend for the future to look also to align our consideration of complaints handling with the reports of the Independent Office for Police Complaints, so that we can pick up any issues which arise in relation to South Yorkshire from those. Secondly, in relation to stop and search at the bottom of page 92, this wasn't a full review of stop and search figures or anything. Our lead member, Mr. Lewis, took up, asked the panel to consider an issue which has been raised for the forces scrutiny panels for stop and search. So the system is, as you may know, that a sample of stop and search incidents are put to a scrutiny panel, not our panel, the scrutiny panel on which external members are present but not vetted to a high level. The issue was whether or not body-worn video should be made available to those scrutiny panels, because nearly always, I understand, body-worn video recordings are available of stop and search incidents. The panel had a discussion, decided that there were no fundamental ethical objections, but there clearly are data protection issues for the subject of the the subject of the stop and search. So we've left it, we've put it back to the force as something on which they will need to take advice before that proposal should go ahead.
It's quite an interesting one, because I think as a force we're really keen to do it, because I think it aids transparency, it's an independent record, and you get advice, but I think it's sensible just to make sure that we're not going to cause ourselves a problem with data protection. So it was quite an interesting one, really.
Al, I don't think I need to deal with anything else, but I'm happy to answer questions on any other points that are in the report.
Okay. Does anyone have any comments?
No, I think it's working really well. I think the work that the panel did around the ethical principles for robotics, automation, artificial intelligence, I think it puts us fairly well ahead of the game nationally. I think it's paying dividends already. We've had some technological proposals come to an SCT, and we've said, well, it needs to be in line with the principles that have been laid down, so I think that's really helpful. I think it was very timely. I think the thematic work, stop and search being one example, I think it's a good way of doing business, rather than us periodically providing reports, because Michael and other members of the panel are very proactive. They get out there and they get a lot better feel, and hopefully should give you a lot better reassurance, because they're seeing it live. So there's nothing, just taking it off a report. They can go see it, feel how it goes, gives us good feedback. So I think it's developing really well, very positive.
It does feel better not to be paper-based. I mean, obviously we still have to consider papers, but the DEP has made a very good point there, that the personal experience of the lead members on whatever their subject is informing the rest of the panel and the debate.
And does every member of the panel have a lead responsibility?
Except me, yes.
you lead the lead.
Well, they keep sending me emails, so it's actually quite a lot of work, but yes.
I think it's really good the way they've got stuck in, and they go the extra mile in all of this. And of course, someone like Michael Lewis, he's a custody visitor as well, he's got a wide knowledge of what's happening.
They're all fitting in very well to the roles that have been allocated to them, obviously with their agreement. We'll keep an eye on it, but it seems like it's the right way forward.
And have we got a reasonable representation across the county? I know Janet Wheatley was here, wasn't she?
Yes, she was. She was the head of voluntary action.
Yes. But what about Barnsley and Doncaster?
It's not. Our Barnsley member retired on moving to Cornwall, which is unfortunate. It could be better geographically spread. By agreement with Michelle, the numbers have been kept small, unlike some of the other panel independent, well, there are very few, but Manchester and Birmingham, Manchester and West Midlands in particular are large panels. So it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off between
I get that, and I think
cost.
I think the interaction between people in a small panel is much better. I think the quality of the discussions is better than you've got lots of people around a table in that way.
But you're right. I mean, the lack of representation of anyone who's from Barnsley or Doncaster is a concern. But hopefully, with retirements coming up, that can be put right.
Yeah, we can just keep an eye on that. And other panels have people from these places. So.
We do.
Good. Thank you very much, Andrew. I think that's everything there. Delivery plans. Item 18, the OPCC delivery plan. Michelle, nice to
Yeah. Commissioner, with the original papers, there was a cover report and then an A3 sheet that looks like that. It's our version of a plan on a page, but it's your plan on the page as well, Commissioner.
It's a big page.
It is a big page, so we're
For a
cheating
little
slightly.
Plan, it's a big page.
Your plan is at the top. So the police and crime plan has not been renewed going into next year because of the PCC elections. So the last renewal was in 2019. So it starts off with your 3 priorities: The grey boxes are all the areas of focus that always feature at the beginning of force performance plans. And then the blue at the bottom is what the OPCC is doing to support your delivery of the police and crime plan, whether it's holding to account support, assurance support, or our own delivery and commissioned services. Below the plan on a page is then a high-level narrative that was circulated separately, which I just wanted to highlight a few things from there, Commissioner, if I may. I'll take it as read, even though it was circulated late, as you tend to do at this board. But I just want to highlight a few things. So if everybody's...
What did that mean?
Got
to
this?
do at this board?
You don't want me to slavishly read through it all.
Oh, I see. I thought you meant the lateness of papers.
So if everybody's got the supplemental pack, it starts off with an introduction. It looks like that. Starts off with an introduction that talks about the fact that the plan has not been renewed, that the 3 priorities stay the same, that we have a delivery plan aimed at supporting that, and that we have PCC elections on the 7th of May, and that the returning or new PCC will then want to look at police and crime plan setting. So there is, as I say, a high-level narrative. So each of the turquoise or teal bands as titles correspond with a box on that A3 delivery page, one of these boxes across here. So that's how we organise work through the year. And there's just a few things to highlight. I won't go through the strategic and financial planning, but we are refining the process with Force colleagues. I know the chair of JIAC has asked for a workshop on that, so we will talk about that at his workshop. We reference the election at number 2 and number 3, and the preparatory work that I'm leading with support from Mark from the Force perspective, starting with a joint candidate briefing event next week, and liaison with the police area returning officer at Barnsley to make sure the elections, and we're hoping the PCC and the local elections go ahead despite various things happening internationally. And then the support required to a new PCC or a returning PCC post-election. At number 4, it talks about a sustainable model for serious violence. That references the Violence Reduction Unit. We have activity to deliver this year, but it's counted as another foundation year because we have only the promise of 1 year's worth of funding again. And so the latter part of this year is going to be looking at what does a sustainable model look like moving forward. Is it a unit, an increased version of that unit, or is it stripped back to core coordination because the funding doesn't exist, but activities need to continue? So we're doing that on your behalf. At number 6, we are continuing to help shape the future of probation services in our region following the ending of contracts for local community rehabilitation companies and Ministry of Justice reforms there. Moving on to the second section that talks about controls and associated assurance arrangements and activity. It references support to the panels, and I think that's important. Andrew just mentioned the slightly restricted nature of his work by virtue of the fact that there's a restriction on the number of members that you have. And we reference the fact that those assurance panels need our support to be able to deliver what we're asking them to deliver. We had a really useful meeting last week, Commissioner, with you and the Chief Constable, some key officers, and Steve as chair of the JIAC and Andrew as chair of the Independent Ethics Panel, about the assurance activity you want the panels to focus on this year. So the list of what the Chief and yourself and the panel chairs came up with appears at the top of page 8 of the delivery plan in section 8 of our plan. So there's focus on benefits realisation, savings, and then some of the risks that we've highlighted there, supporting the positive culture of the force on its journey to outstanding, etc., etc. So I won't go through those, but that's been referenced So that's why it has been a late delivery plan, because we were still working on conversations to reflect the activity as late as last week. It's about the evaluation and scrutiny activity. You've heard a bit from that activity that's been done this year on neighbourhood policing and victims' voice and victims' code compliance. There's a list at the top of page 9 there of the activity that's continuing into next year. And can I just reference the 4th bullet point there about work with criminal justice partners? I've referenced the court delays. That's something we really want to focus on this year, and a review of the criminal justice arrangements. And then moving into section 3, it talks about delivering activity directly and commissioning services. That's really business as usual, but we have got the violence reduction unit there. We move into the Criminal Justice Board in section 4 around partnership working, the VRU and community safety partners. We think that with the government's consultation on the new public duty, we're going to see the role of CSPs bolstered, the funding that's provided to PCCs and the powers provided to PCCs around community safety partnerships. We expect to have news to report this year, so we're preparing to support whatever those changes look like, and it may well be that that's aligned to violence reduction unit delivery as well. And then the final section deals with communications. That's Fiona's team, whether it's internal, external communications, engagement activity, statutory consultation with the public and partners in support of your precept proposals, with a PCC's consultation around local priorities in accordance with statutory obligations, etc. The final section within section 5 is around meaningful reporting. So we're developing the quarterly reports that you take to the Police and Crime Panel that demonstrates whether the police and crime plan is being delivered, how, where improvements need to be made, and then there's a supporting report on the use of forces, especially the use of resources by the force. So that's the delivery plan for the coming year. A lot will depend on the PCC election and results of that, but we have our statutory obligations, and to support PCC statutory obligations, whatever the direction of travel in a new PCC, Police and Crime Plan, if that's what May brings us.
Thank you very much. A lot of work.
A lot of work
is set out here. We had a letter yesterday from the Home Office about rules around the new surge funding and VRU. I don't know whether that's...
Yeah, I've spoken to...
We're
we're having meetings this week. I touched base with the office this morning in relation to Superintendent Lee Berry's work in the unit, and he's going to have conversations with ACC4 very quickly. We've learnt a lot in the last year. It's been very handy having Superintendent Lee Berry in there to work across both the surge activity of the force and the violence reduction unit. So we can hope for better coordination, I think, this year.
On a quick reading, there didn't seem to be a huge shift in the sort of things they were asking for, but clearly they've got a grip of this, and they want they want to know what you've done with it, and it's all got to be referenced. So it's not just they're throwing money at it. Anyway.
I'm not seeing it yet.
Okay. Right, I think that's everything there. Thank you very much. Force delivery plan. Mark?
Commissioner, I'll be relatively brief, because I think we've touched on and seen some examples of the force's approach to delivery in some of the previous reports. Suffice to say, in terms of our approach to it, we are very conscious that we've got your plan, we've got the requirements of HMIC, and we've got various other things, and from the development of our performance approach, we were very keen to ensure that we had one delivery plan that recognised all the inputs, what did it want, because we couldn't be coming to districts and asking them to deliver on a series of separate plans. That evolved into the plan on a page. I think it's something that served as well. It gives recognises your priorities, as I say, the other priorities within HMIC's framework, and sitting beneath that is, I think, a very comprehensive set of performance data. I think we give our people the information that they need to be able to make decisions, such as here in Rotherham. And then we've got a regime that sits and supports that. So in line with that performance framework, we've got the monthly force performance meetings. We'll obviously report here at PAB. Each member of the command team holds their districts and departments to account through a series of quarterly performance reviews. I then chair meetings with SCT colleagues to ensure that we're making progress in the light of HMIC recommendations, which is still incredibly important for us. We get very good and varied levels of reporting. Principal one for us as an SCT, just to make sure nothing's dipping off track or identifying areas where we need to push, is a bi-weekly performance report, which Dave then disseminates out to the rest of the team and make sure we're pushing on the right issues. And then within that, that then forms a force control strategy, looking at the various strategic threats informed by the strategic intelligence assessment. So I think we've got a comprehensive framework. There's detail there about various aspects of it. I think it's fair to say we do, and constantly, given the history of the force and Rotherham in particular, take an eye around matters of child sexual exploitation, child sexual abuse. It is something that we recurrently are alive to, together with partners. And then beyond that, I think we've really placed some focus on key deliverables this year to put us in a good place for what's about to come down the line. And I say that because I think it's fairly clear that with the reinstitution of the 20,000 officers nationally and the part that comes with us, there will be a greater steer from government around the outcomes that they would wish. So work's ongoing on with that. I think we can probably foresee some of the key areas, and we've been already having those conversations since pre-Christmas about the areas of focus for the coming year. So it's building on the response times, it's building on the work around domestic abuse, building on satisfaction. But I think now we need to see some progress in terms of reductions around key crimes such as burglary, violence, and positive outcome rates for those categories as well. And performance framework is all aimed at making sure that we can take sensible measures to push performance in those areas. There's a whole range of governance groups, some of them external with your committee, some of them internal with the various thematic leads. So I think hopefully there's reassurance there that we have got a handle on this. And I think the examples that come out from this meeting are, for example, custody, where it's identified with HMIC about the recording of data and inspectors' reviews. That immediately goes into our governance process, and you see timely and sustainable improvements in that performance. Response times are always going to be a priority for us, but certainly HMIC on one of the previous visits articulate their need for a view from the bridge about force demand. That has been dealt with in terms of the response times and our understanding about demand. So we aim to pull it together and do it once. And the final thing of point of reassurance really is Appendix 2, which is our current position with Peel and the HMIC inspections. You'll recall that not too long ago it was a fairly challenging picture with at least one area inadequate, the rest requires improvement. Typically we're now good across the board, outstanding in the area of legitimacy. We are really fixing our sights on pushing forward on other areas where we would seek to be outstanding. I think the one ungraded one, we were pretty disappointed with that we weren't inspected actually, because I think some of our capability on the specialist side, which Dave heads on, puts us in a really good place, both in dealing with some of the contingencies that we're currently facing, but some of the more pressing threats around terrorism and organised crime. I think as a force we took some difficult decisions, but retained some really strong capability to try and meet the threats of that. So we were actually quite disappointed we weren't inspected on that, because we were anticipating a positive, or a very positive, or even an outstanding outcome on it.
Yes. I know what you say about officer numbers, the increase, and the Home Office will obviously want to see outcomes here. If we're going to put money and raise your numbers, we want certain outcomes. Is it your view, I don't know whether you feel you can comment on this, that we are there is a danger that we might slip back into the old days of having targets that police have to meet, and then we know what that can result in, because we saw that here in South Yorkshire.
Yeah, well, that's a matter for the Home Office and how they want to do it with the government. I think what I'd say from our perspective is whatever the requirement is nationally, we will clearly look to deliver against that. what is within our gift is how we deliver against it. So we won't be going back to arbitrary numbers without the understanding of what sits behind it. I think policing, personal view, but seems to get its knickers in a twist a bit around performance. It seems to flop from one side of just let everyone do what they want and it'll turn out right, to the other, red, green, green good, red bad. That's not performance. Performance is the bit in the middle where you understand the issue, you apply intelligence to it, and you structurally do the things that can drive a better performance in an intelligent way. So actually delivering performance and having a good performance regime isn't about being bombastic or overly challenging to people. It's about answering sensible questions and expecting a good answer. So you can deliver good performance without breaking people.
Alan, you'll recall that that was one of the issues we discussed at the Assurance Chairs meeting on Thursday, and I mean, I certainly need to think a bit more about it. I'm hoping the DEP will have ideas about how we can assist in that. It's one of the 3 areas listed in Michelle's paper that the IEP should assist with.
Okay.
It can be done. I mean,
something to keep an eye on.
I mean, I'm old enough. I was a district commander in the midst of street crime initiative stuff, targets and the like in GMP, and we managed to achieve really good performance whilst doing it in a sensible, ethical way. So it's not something that can't be done. It has been done, and it will be done here.
Mm. Yeah, it's just not being blinkered. You've got to keep looking around all the time, I think, if you're focusing on particular areas. Thank you. That's delivery plans. Other hard work programme 113, 116. Michelle.
Nothing to say, Commissioner.
Nothing to say.
It's there.
Yeah, right. Okay. I never thought I'd live to hear the day when Michelle said I've nothing to say. Exclusion that we've done all that. Any other business? Is there any other business? Okay. Date time the next week. So 7th of April, 10 a.m. in Barnsley Town Hall. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Rotherham.